With more on this, I'm joined now by former Liberal Defence Minister David Collenette and former Conservative Defence Minister Jason Kenney. Hi to both of you. Great to have you back together and here. Mr. Collenette, I'll start with you, and chiefly on what might happen this week. It sounds very much like some sort of agreement has been reached, at least in using the profits from those assets to provide a loan to Ukraine. Do you think a deal on this is significant, would be significant, and why?
Well, it's absolutely significant, Vashti, because we just seen in the last few months, or the last 6 months, where Ukraine was dependent on American aid. When that didn't come, it's caused a problem on the battlefield. And the thinking here is that you can get $50 to $75 billion using those frozen assets, not the full amount, but the interest to pay a loan that would be taken out. And so there will be continual funding for Ukraine. And frankly, if there's a change of government in the US and Donald Trump gets in with his views on Ukraine, it would mean that there would be sustained funding well into the next congressional cycle in the United States.
Mr. Kenney, beyond the sort of practicality of that, from a symbolic perspective, particularly at a time when Putin has been making advances in Ukraine, is it important for the G7 to send a message through something like this?
Well, yes, absolutely. But Ukraine has had a lot of nice messages from Western countries. What it needs is real material. It needs more lethal equipment, more long-range weapons, more air defense systems. There's a long list of what is desperately needed if it's not just going to effectively defend themselves against this increasing Russian offensive, but be able to retake their territory and force Putin to recalculate. I mean, the fundamental Ukrainian strategic objective here is to break the Kerch land bridge that the Russians took that allows them to supply Crimea very directly. If the Ukrainians could get closer and effectively destroy the rail and road infrastructure that leads into Crimea, both there and across the bridge that Putin built, then they force Putin to the table on their terms. So all of that is critical. So I'm glad to hear maybe there is some progress on these technical discussions about the Europeans using some of the frozen Russian assets to, as David says, finance some of the U.S.-backed debt and the amount of about $50 billion. But so much more could be done if Europe had the boldness to actually seize those frozen assets, right, and liquidate them and actually provide those assets to Ukraine. And the value of those assets, estimated to be about $550 billion US dollars, is significantly less than the damage done to Ukraine. And Canada could do its part. Otherwise, we're just going to be at the sidelines watching technical discussions between the EU and US at the G7 meeting. We have legislation that was passed by the Trudeau government last year. An amendment was that would allow us to seize those assets. We should lead by example and have the moral authority to encourage our allies to do the same.
Mr. Kenney brings up a very interesting point, which is that Canada and the U.S. have advocated for more. Essentially, what it sounds like will be announced this week is some sort of negotiation that they have arrived at. And I think Minister Freeland has spoken about it being kind of a practical way of getting Europe to the table, because there was resistance, and there has been resistance from Europe to what Mr. Kenney laid out for a couple of reasons. First, they say it would contravene international law, though there are a lot of experts who argue otherwise. Second, I mean, they are concerned about escalation with Putin. How would you respond to that?
Well, on the last point, yes, there's always a concern. Each side ups the ante. Where is it going to end? But let's not forget that 2/3 of the frozen assets are in Europe. Yeah. And Europeans have a tough time getting a consensus on many things. I'm surprised that Hungary hasn't sort of vetoed this, although I think there's an arrangement where on financial issues a majority can take the decision. But of course, the point here is that the whole fund is not going to be used. It's really to use the interest on the amount of money that Jason talked about.
That's the compromise, basically.
Yeah, that's the compromise. But and then someone's going to have to take out the money, the loan on the open markets. I think the Americans are prepared to do that. And of course, what the Americans want is, and the Europeans, is they want to buy in a wider buy-in. And so they're asking G7 countries like Canada to share some of the risk that's entailed. I think this is probably the fairest compromise you can get. Jason's talking more of an ideal setup, and I agree with him. But for now, I think this will help immeasurably.
And I do understand that point, Mr. Kenney, that something is certainly, and this is not a small something, but that something is better than nothing. But I also wonder, when Putin sees the hesitation in Europe, what message it sends him.
Well, it sends him the message that aggression pays. Just yesterday we unveiled here in Calgary a statue in honor of Sir Winston Churchill, and I recalled in my remarks his statement before the Second World War, when he saw the gathering clouds of war from Hitler's Germany, that the appeaser is somebody who feeds the crocodile hoping that he'll be eaten last. Well, we have been, in that sense, passively appeasing Putin for too long. And this is an example. So the Canadian cabinet, or the Canadian Parliament, amended the legislation that allows us clearly to seize foreign assets, but we haven't actually exercised that power to seize the frozen Russian assets in Canada. Why not? Well, I suspect it's because bureaucrats at the Department of Global Affairs and Finance are saying, hold on a minute, that would be contrary to the rules-based international order, which is a lovely slogan, but Putin smashed the rules-based international order. Should we maintain a asymmetry where he gets to break all of the rules in his violent campaign of aggression while we continue to play tiddlywinks here? I mean, if he's purposefully targeting civilians. We're now well into the second year of this brutal European war for which he's entirely responsible. He needs to pay a price. And if that means that Russia loses $500 billion of assets, being not just frozen, but seized and given to the Ukrainians, I think there is a compelling moral and strategic cause to do so.
Mr. Collenette, last word to you.
Well, I think that's the ultimate goal, but as with everything in life, there are steps to get to a certain goal. So right now, the proposal that everyone seems to be agreed on is to use the interest from the seized assets. But I agree that ultimately we need to get most of that, certainly for the rebuilding of Ukraine. There's going to have to be a peace deal at some point, and to Jason's point, that we have to get Ukraine back more aggressive on the battlefield so things are much more even, and that will entice Putin to negotiate.
Okay, I have to leave it on that note. Thank you very much for making the time, both of you. I appreciate it, as always. Jason Kenney and David Collenette, thank you.